everyone, and welcome to session 7 and the last week of our training series. My name is Cindy Schmidt, and I'm going to be joined by my colleague Amber McCullum for the exercise and the lecture portion of the series today. So all the course materials can be found on the website listed here. There's nothing actually to download for today since we're doing Webtools, but if you need anything from our previous exercises, just go to our website. We'll have time for discussion or questions at the end of each exercise. And of course, if you have any questions or issues, even after the series is ended, you could email me or Amber at our email addresses listed here. And as you know, the series has been a mix of lectures and hands-on exercises, and all the exercises have been in ArcGIS Pro. However, we've written the exercises in ArcGIS Desktop and QGIS as well. And then each week we focused on a different tribal region in the US, and today we'll be focusing on, we'll get a great presentation from a colleague of ours in the Pacific Northwest, and I'll tell you about him in just a minute. Just as a reminder, week 1, we did intro to remote sensing. Week 2, we did intro to land cover classification. Week 3, last week, was change detection and time series. And then this week is remote sensing web tools. So the two things we'll go over today is learning about the drought severity evaluation tool, or DSET, and then you'll also learn about the fire information resource management system, or FIRMS. But before I get into talking about both of these tools, I am very happy to introduce our guest speaker for today, Talon Arbuckle from the Tulalip Tribes of Washington, and he just received his bachelor's degree in environmental tribal science. And he'll be talking to you about himself a little bit and a little bit about the tribes up in Washington. So over to you, Talon.
Hello everyone, my name is Talon Arbuckle. I am pictured here on the right next to my little sister Heaven at my graduation for my Bachelor's of Science in Native Environmental Science, awarded by Northwest Indian College. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the Pacific Northwest as a region, the various tribal groups and entities therein, and our uses for geographic information services. I myself am a member of the Tulalip Tribes of Washington, which we'll get to a little later. But I look forward to giving you this presentation, and I hope you find it interesting, and I hope this finds you well. The institution I attended, the Northwest Indian College, was the result of many years of work by the Lummi Tribal Nation, initially founded as the Lummi School of Aquaculture with the intention of teaching the people of Lummi all the different tools available in modern aquaculture and shellfish farming. Eventually, they became the first, and so far as I know, still only tribal college that is recognized in Washington State. And over time, they became accredited, now offer various degrees at the baccalaureate level, and have several extended campus sites, including one in my home of Tulalip, which is where I originally got started. And eventually, I ended up moving up to the Lummi campus to complete my degree. Throughout the course of the completion of my degree, I met many people from several different tribes all throughout the Pacific Northwest, and I really realized the extent to which all of the different sites and things have come together to both align all of us as Coast Salish people, as well as ensure that our individual cultures are maintained. For example, in Tulalip, the language courses offered are in the Chute Seat, whereas up in Lummi, They offer the Lummi language, which is distinct, although it is from the same language family. Speaking of languages, we are all members of the Coast Salish ethno-linguistic group. I am from approximately this region, and that's where Tulalip is located, and Nooksack / the Lummi language family is up here. Although we are distinct, we do share a common root language, which you can think of kind of like Latin or something like that if you're less familiar. And as a result, we all have certain shared interests as well as the ability to cross-communicate. A lot of people used to speak a specific trade tone called Chinook jargon, and as a result, we have a long history of complex intertribal relationships. And I'm just extremely thrilled that we maintain our individuality while also ensuring that we come together as a group. Here I have included just a quick little outline of where the Tulalip Reservation is located, and we'll go a little through the history and the culture of the people there in the next few slides. Here, there's just a little bit of information about Tulalip history. Tulalip is named for Tiflalip, which is the name of the bay. And the reason it's called that is because Tiflalip, when translated, would approximately mean far to the end. And it's just in reference how you'd have to swing a canoe far out in order to avoid running aground on the sandbar on the south side of the bay. And just a quick fun fact, that's likely where Captain Vancouver ran aground, and he's credited with discovering the people in the region, which is amazing to me. I've never discovered a place where people already lived. I think that must be a distinctly colonial event. Moving on, Tulalip people always refer to themselves as salmon people, and that's mostly because we've subsisted off salmon for millennia. It's a core part of our diet as well as our culture. And what importantly about that, the 1855 Treaty of Point Elliott set up Tulalip Bay as the reservation for many tribes and bands, including Snohomish, Snoqualmie, Skiquamish, Still-Guamish, and several other related tribes. And eventually we became the Confederated Tulalip Tribes, which helped us gain recognition as a sovereign entity and affirmed all of the individual tribes' fishing, hunting, and gathering rights as protected under the 1855 Treaty of Point Elliott. Here, I'd just like to touch briefly on Tulalip people, Coast Salish people in general, and our relationship to salmon. Because the area has historically been fairly abundant with all sorts of wild food as well as fish, we have been quite comfortable, but over the last 200 or 300 years, salmon population has dwindled, and thankfully, many tribes in both their individual capacities and through the collective efforts of the Northwest Indian Fish Commission have established hatcheries and all sorts of different practices to try to restore and maintain salmon populations, including things involving water quality, dam removal. We'll get to more of that later. I'm really excited about that. And just throughout the region, there's been a long history of fighting for the recognition of the inherent rights of the different Coast Salish people, and also trying to uphold their treaty rights. You can check out the Bolt decision for a little reference to that. And that has always been a real point of contention when it came to fish and shellfish. So now a little on to Tulalip GIS and our various projects. Here, there's a story map link that I think Amber has available to you guys that just is a little bit of a brief overview about how we're using land classification in the region and why we're looking into doing more of it. We're also looking to incorporate drone technology to do so with a better resolution. Here we just have a quick example next to the Pulsita Creek, which is an important creek in the region and also was one of the areas that was historically significant. And what we've mapped here is pepperweed extent. And pepperweed is this highly invasive, I think to the degree that transport of it in the state of Washington is either illegal or somehow has some sort of regulation surrounding it because it can be so invasive and form a really woody, terrible to remove monoculture so rapidly. We're always looking to find ways to monitor invasive species extent as well as trying to control it. Here there's a video about dam removal, and we hope to use GIS to monitor how effective it is and what it does for the region. Please enjoy.
July 15th, 2020 is our first day of in-water work. It's the first day that the permits allow us to go into the water. So, of course, I'm getting pretty excited because I've been waiting for this for a long time. And the machines start coming, having to cross the river and start digging out material so that we can divert the whole river, and they get closer and closer to the dam. Finally, we're able to divert the whole river through the fish ladder, get the water out of the way, and then I see Mike with his excavator sitting there about ready to start hammering the dam. And when you see that first little bit of concrete go flying, it means a celebratory moment. The Pilchuck River Diversion Dam was initially installed in 1912. There was actually two dams that were formerly at the site. One was just upstream of the bigger dam that was installed in 1932. They both were installed to supply drinking water to the city of Snohomish. Things get old, transmission mains start failing, it starts costing a lot of money, and so at this point there is no purpose for it anymore because the city purchased water from a different source for much less money, and so it allowed us to remove this dam. Certainly when the dam was built, it was a much different time. Did not do a good job of thinking about what kind of damage that would do to resources or to people and their culture and their lifeways. I think it's incredibly frustrating, and I think it's something that's happened not just here, but all over the Northwest, all over the country for the last 250, 300 years. Tribal people have been, ignored and haven't had their values represented. That's how we got in this situation that we're in with this dam, and why it was so important to help get this dam removed. It's important for the fish, and it's important for the culture, important for the people, but it's also important for righting that historical wrong.
It's really exciting for Tulalip to be a part of this because this took out a dam that was destroying the spawning beds for fish for many generations. So this is really exciting for Tulalip to be one of the leads in making this project a reality. Our ancestors are very thankful. I could feel my dad too. He's very proud of this moment to see this open up. We are the salmon people. As co-managers of this resource, the salmon, we know what needs to be done to help them survive.
So when we first moved that little bucket of material and let the river reoccupy where it hadn't been for over 100 years, we started seeing sediment sorting downriver. You could stand in the channel and feel your foot kind of sinking as all the sediment going downstream. It was really cool to see that river, that dynamic river process kind of come back to life. It's like the river just all of a sudden kind of got its old life back, and you could see it moving, you could see it changing. And I'm really excited to see what happens when we get some bigger flows. Right now, the river is at its summer low flow, but in a month or two, it's going to start raging out here, and that's when we're going to see really big changes in the site, specifically where the dam used to be and just slightly upstream. We really know that there's not going to be many changes downstream, but it's going to be so exciting to see what happens here on site and how the river reoccupies its historic location.
This river has finally got to flow the way it wanted to, back to its natural state. So we're really excited to see what will come in the future of this project. This means a lot, not only to our people, but to future generations, to make sure that they will have salmon for their children and their grandchildren. So we will also help with the efforts to save the Kolkola H, see how much more fish we can provide to save our natural resources.
We have got to get projects like this done, period. I mean, we absolutely just have to. There isn't enough quality spawning and rearing habitat, and those are the things sort of that we can control.
the fish are adept at navigating their way through the river the way it naturally flows. And so now that we've gotten rid of this dam and taken it out, the river is going to take back over and it's going to do, what it's supposed to do, which is it's going to flash up in the winter and it's going to push things down and it's going to pull trees into the river. And the fish, they're perfectly adapted to that, both the juveniles and the adults.
This dam was located right at the edge between the best habitat in the whole river basin and the impacted downstream habitat that people have been modifying for a really long time. So that edge that was defined by a dam, by an obstruction, instead be opened up to where that connection between really great habitat and areas that we're trying to help facilitate get better, that little connection, that little restoring the river connectivity is really cool. And I expect that to continue over time. I think we're learning from our mistakes, and I think that we're not going to be putting these damaging dams in these rivers in this place anymore, because I think we know that that impacts us, that impacts people, that impacts fish, that degrades our experience. And so I'm really, really hopeful that we'll just continue to increase downstream habitat and increase connectivity so that we really see gains over time in these places. I don't see anything back there. Nothing was gone.
Thanks so much for that great presentation, Talon. So next, I'm going to do an overview of the drought severity evaluation tool, followed by an overview of firms, and then this will be followed by an exercise two exercises actually, that Amber will walk you through. So DSAT is a new tool co-developed by the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources, NASA, and the Desert Research Institute. The project is funded under NASA's Applied Sciences program, specifically within the newly created Western Water Applications Office. This program focuses on the states west of the 100th meridian and is really geared toward the usefulness of NASA data. And it actually started many years ago with a group of interns from an internship program that we have at NASA called Develop. The project is focused on the use of satellite and ground data for drought reporting on the Navajo Nation. The Desert Research Institute, or DRI, is also a partner on this project. The Navajo Nation is the largest federally recognized sovereign tribe in the United States in total land area of over 70,000 square kilometers and a population of over 200,000 people. It's located in the Four Corners region of the southwestern U.S. in the states of Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. The landscape is varied with high elevation mountains and plateaus and low-lying arid regions. The nation is surrounded by the four sacred mountains shown on this slide. Precipitation variability often leads to water shortages that have dramatic effects across the nation. Drought is common on the Navajo Nation, and there are limited in situ precipitation and runoff data in the region. There are many water supply and drought reporting challenges in this region. Even during periods of normal water conditions, there's low reliability in the water supply, with over 40% of homes lacking direct access to running water. This leaves many residents reliant on water haulers. During dry periods, these efforts increase, which are time and resource intensive. Agriculture and livestock management is of great importance on the Navajo Nation as well, and can be challenging under these dramatic climate conditions. Here's an example of how the drought status reports are generated for the Navajo Nation. Carl McClellan and others from the Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources visit multiple websites such as the Western Regional Climate Center and the U.S. Drought Monitor. These sites often provide a coarse picture of drought on the nation and often does not indicate where drought may be more severe than in other places. Also, these sites do not include ground-based data acquired by the Water Management Branch. Therefore, the primary goal of this project was to improve upon drought reporting through NASA Earth observations and in situ data within a user-friendly web application specific to the Navajo Nation. The anticipated impact is to provide information necessary to make more informed decisions about the allocation of drought relief dollars to the regions that need it most. The Desert Research Institute hosts the tool as a spin-off of their popular Climate Engine website. Climate Engine harnesses the power of the cloud through Google Earth Engine for on-the-fly computing. Climate Engine has many satellite and model gridded layers that users can display as a map or as a time series. It's been used for many applications like drought, agriculture, and wildfire monitoring. So this is what the DSET tool currently looks like, with the nation's chapter boundaries and the rain gauge locations shown. So the chapters are just sub-boundaries within the Navajo Nation greater boundary. So it could be used to ask a question like, what are the rain gauge totals for each site from the last summer monsoon, or June, July, August? You could then create a time series of the monthly totals from any of these sites, like the Wheatfield site shown here. Another question of interest may be something like, what was the precipitation percent of average from the last northern water year? Here you can see a map of that with each chapter displayed. You can see that last year was a particularly dry year for the nation, with much of the precipitation between 70 and 80% of average. We've also added the ability to create an area averaged 6-month standardized precipitation index, or SPI, estimates for each specific agency, which is sort of like a US state. And the chapters you see here to help identify how the severity of the drought may be different in different regions across the nation. So the team is also exploring additional applications relevant to the Water Management Branch, such as analyzing snowpack, particularly in the Cheska Mountains. Here you can see from snow water equivalent values from last December, January, and February, where the values in the Cheskas reached over 300% of average. Next, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the Fire Information Resource Management System, or FIRMS. So the two main Earth observing systems for fire are MODIS and VIIRS. Landsat is also used, but because of the temporal frequency of MODIS and VIIRS, these sensors tend to be used more for active fire monitoring. And you can see the details on each of these systems listed here. Generally for wildfire management, at least for using remote sensing, there's 3 phases. There's the pre-fire mapping, active fire mapping, and post-fire mapping. And NASA's funded projects in each of these 3 areas. In pre-fire mapping, there's things like vegetation density and extent, soil moisture, etc. Active fire mapping is what we're going to be talking about today. And then post-fire mapping includes things like total area burned, burn severity, and looking at regrowth. So the Fire Information for Resource Management System, or FIRMS, distributes near real-time active fire data within 3 hours of a satellite observation from both MODIS and VIIRS. So FIRMS is part of something called the Land Atmosphere Near Real-Time Capability for EOS, or just remember LANCE. And within firms, there's several different sort of capabilities listed on the bottom here. So you can see you can actually see a fire map. You can get active fire data. You can get fire alerts. You can download archive data. And then there's some web services. So I'm going to go through a couple of these things now. So if you want to display the current fires in firms, you can do that. And then on the right-hand side, you can see you can get the VIIRS data, the 375 meter, which is the spatial resolution, or the MODIS data, which is a coarser 1 kilometer spatial resolution. So most people these days are using the VIIRS data because it's more locationally accurate because of its high spatial resolution. But you can look at fires that are occurring all over the world using this website. You can actually download the active fire data from both MODIS and VIIRS for the past 24, 48 hours, and 7 days in a variety of formats. You can see listed here, shapefile, KML, etc. And then there's some more information about the how far back you can get it. For MODIS, it's 2000, and for VIIRS, it's 2012. You can also subscribe to get fire alerts, so you get emails notifying you of fires in your area as soon as they're detected, and you can get them as daily or weekly summaries. You can also get CSVs or KML files along with the emails if you want. And so, of course, everything is free, and you can sign up at the website that's listed there. So at this point, we're going to jump right into this exercise to show you how to use DSET and firms. So I'll hand it over to Amber.
All right. Thanks, Cindy, for that great overview of DSET and firms. As Cindy mentioned, we're going to jump right into the DSET exercise. So this is exercise 9. And this exercise document really starts out with familiarizing yourself with the tool itself. So there's a lot of information about the features of the tool, and we'll step through a lot of these. So to start off, over here on the left-hand side, you'll see two options, make map or make graph, and we'll explore both of those. You can customize the way the map looks along the top here with some of these features. And then you also have the ability to share the link. So if you've run some kind of process and you're displaying imagery, or you created a time series, you can actually get this unique link to where you are and send that to colleagues so that they can be directed to all of the features that you've already pre-selected. And we'll go through a lot of these examples. So this tool was really designed initially to focus on drought monitoring on the Navajo Nation. However, there are data available for a lot of different applications. So we can look at agricultural fields, snowpack, meadow restoration, and I did want to mention that we are creating, similar to this training in a lot of ways, we're creating an interactive user guide that will be hosted on the Western Water Applications Office website very soon. So we can share that information as soon as that goes live, but it'll have these kinds of exercises and case study applications for many of these different ways that you can use the DSET tool. So we are going to first start off with a drought example. Here on the left-hand side is your sort of your layer panel, where you can select a variety of different variables. Along the top, you can change the parameters of your map. So the very first thing we'll do is click here on map and then go to roadmap. I sort of like this It's a little cleaner, but you can choose a lot of different base map styles, similar to what you'd choose for Google Maps. And then we're going to modify some of these parameters. We are going to take a look at the CHIRPS daily data. And CHIRPS, we're going to be using this a lot. This is a modeled data set that uses satellite remote sensing data alongside ground-based stations, and it creates a gridded product of precipitation on daily basis, as well as for the pentad. So that's close to weekly, not quite weekly. And for all of these data sets, you can always click on these little yellow question marks to get more information about the data set itself. So you can come in here and learn about CHIRPS, go visit the website. This is created a product created by the University of California, Santa Barbara. So you can get this information here. So we're going to use our CHIRPS daily data. We're interested in the precipitation as the variable. For the time period, you can choose a custom time period, but you can also choose these pre-selected date ranges. For this example, we're going to first take a look at the last northern growing season. So you can see this is from April to October, and depending on when you do this exercise, the start date and the end date will be modified to the most recent growing season that you've already passed through. So we're getting close to the end of this growing season. So shortly thereafter, it'll be updated to the 2020 season, but not until after the end of October. So what we'll do here is just click on Get Map Layer, and then this process will load. So what's happening here is this gridded data, these gridded data that are available on Google Earth Engine are being displayed and processed for this entire region. So it's quite powerful what can be done. So now you can see that we have a map of total precipitation from the last northern growing season over the Navajo Nation. We can see the precipitation legend here along the top. The other thing we can do is if we're interested in a specific region, we can use this Get Value option. And you can just slide around your geomarker. So if for example, we're interested in the precipitation in the Chippewa Mountains, we can move the marker there and click on Show Value. And this will take a moment, but then this should load and display the actual value at that location. So you can see here for the last northern growing season, in this region of the Chippewa Mountains, the total was 176.4 millimeters. So that's useful, but maybe that doesn't really tell us a whole lot about how different this year is from average. CHIRPS data are available back to 1981, so they have this really nice time period where we can calculate essentially the percent of average or difference of average conditions. So next, if we come over back to our layer panel, we'll change this to the CHIRPS pentad data because the processing time is a little slower for doing a statistic like the percent of average. If we come down here to the calculation, you can see we have a lot of different options. Average, difference from average, percent difference from average. So we're going to choose percent of average conditions. And our last northern growing season will still be selected. And then we can click on Get Map Layer. Now for processes like this, like the percent of average, the computing time can be quite slow because essentially what's happening is it's computing the climatological average from 1981 to 2010. And then it's computing the difference for every single pixel that's being displayed here from that average. So if you're having, if your bandwidth is a little slow, this may take a long time to process. Another thing that I didn't mention at the beginning is that because this is a Google tool, this was built to be used in Chrome. So I do recommend that you use Chrome for your for doing this exercise, because Firefox is usually pretty good, but maybe some other tools or some other web browsers, you might not have the same functionality. But just as a heads up, the processing can take quite a while sometimes. And if you do get an error, like a timeout error, you can always reset and start over. But just be aware of that for these sort of in-depth calculations. So now we can see our percent of average was calculated, and the legend on the top shows us that for the entire Navajo Nation, we were below average conditions. So mostly between 70 and 90% of average. So that's not terrible, but a little bit below average. You can always, again, use this get value, kind of move the geomarker around and see what that value is in a particular location, in a particular chapter, or close to the particular rain gauge location. And so you can see here the percent of average is 69%. So quite a bit below average here for this growing season. Now we know that much of the precipitation on the Navajo Nation falls during the winter months as well. The nation experiences two wet periods, the summer monsoons and the winter time. So if we just want to look, for example, at the last northern water year, we can select that as well down here in our time period of interest. And the northern water year ranges from, it starts at the beginning of October and goes through the end of September. And this is oftentimes used in the West and the Southwest as a marker for when we receive a lot of our precipitation. So we can do this again and get map layer, and we can see what the differences are from the percent of average over the summertime months versus the wintertime months. And you can compare and contrast these different time periods to see, maybe how much below average we are. You could also use the entire year if you were interested in that. You can select a custom date range for particular time periods. And once again, this might take a little while for you. It's slowly processing. Another tip I'd like to make is that if you are only interested in a small region, if you zoom in prior to clicking on Get Map Layer, the processing time will be shortened, because what it's doing, what DSET is doing here, is it's calculating this computation across everything that you're seeing in the map right now. So if you're only interested in a specific chapter on the Navajo Nation, you can zoom into that prior to clicking on Get Map Layer. Another thing I will note is that Climate Engine is global. So for those of you who are not in the US, you can use Climate Engine with most of the same functionality, with the exception of these shapefiles that you see, the outline of the administrative boundaries of the nation. So a lot of this can be done globally in other regions as well. Okay, so now you can see that the precipitation percent of average for the last northern water year was actually pretty average, and even above average with some of these blue colors along the northern part of the nation. There are still some regions that are below average, but it presents a little different picture of rainfall if we just take a look at that northern water year. So now let's look at a few of the drought indices. We are going to go ahead and change our data set back to CHIRPS daily. And for our variable, instead of precipitation, we are going to use the Standardized Precipitation Index, or SPI. And as with the other variables, if we click on the yellow question mark, we can get information about all these different climate, vegetation, and drought metrics that are found within Climate Engine and DSET. So we can learn about what the Standardized Precipitation Index is. It is essentially difference from average, the anomalies of the current time period based on the climatological average of 1981 to 2010 of just precipitation. Some of the other drought metrics use other pieces of information like evapotranspiration, temperature anomalies, things like that. But the SPI is purely based on anomalies in precipitation. Anyway, so you can go ahead and close that. Now we are going to take a look at a custom time period. So we have our custom date range here. We are going to select, go ahead and come down here and change the start and end date. We're going to change the start date to 2019 5/1, and then the end date to 2019 10/31. And go ahead again on Get Map Layer. So this one processed a little more quickly than some of the others. And what you're seeing here now is are the SPI values. An SPI value that is negative indicates below average precipitation conditions, and a positive value indicates above average precipitation. So we can see the legend here along the top. If we click on this, we can also see how the SPI values compare to the US Drought Monitor. So the category, the color designations fall within the US Drought Monitor designations as well. On the Navajo Nation, when there is an SPI value of negative 1.5 or lower, a drought emergency is declared, which means that resources are sent across the nation to help mitigate for the effects of the drought. So this could be things like sending hay to farmers, hauling water, things like that. So we can get a nice clear picture of what's going on in terms of drought using this SPI. Okay, as at any point along the exercise, you can always reset. When you reset, you're taken to what the main page looks like. We're just going to go ahead and do that here along the top right. And now we will change our base map. We'll just try something else. We'll try the light landmass style. You can play around with these different styles based on what you prefer. Now we are going to take a look at a different data set called GridMet. And that's another modeled data set that's produced from the University of Idaho. And it uses, I believe it uses PRISM data to do a lot of its calculation. We're going to select GridMet Drought as the data set. And the GridMet Drought has these pre-computed SPI indices. This is something very new with our tool. So we're still working out the kinks. So depending on when you do this, you may or may not have some slight issues with this GridMet Drought. But the great thing about this is that all of these are pre-computed and you can select different time periods based on how long you're interested in analyzing the data. So we're going to select this 160-day SPI, which is the same as a 6-month SPI. And that is the metric that's most often used by the water management branch on the Navajo Nation. When you select this 180-day SPI, what you'll notice is that here along the bottom, the time period, your end date is going to be specific to when you did this exercise. So for this example, the end date is going to be 9/26, and then it'll take the 6 months prior to that, the 180 days prior to that. So your date might be a little different here. Now we'll just go ahead and click on Get Map Layer. So this is pretty striking. The Navajo Nation has been in a pretty extensive drought this summer and this fall. So we can see here that given this drought, the drought designation, the Navajo Nation is in an exceptional drought for most of the nation. If we are only looking at deficits in precipitation, we can also look at other drought metrics, such as the Palmer Drought Severity Index, which is a little different than the SPI. So what we can do here is we'll keep the GridMet drought, but we will select the PDSI. And once again, if you're interested in the PDSI, you can come in here and take a look. It's essentially a water balance model. So it's taking into account many things like the evapotranspiration, temperature, humidity, wind speed. There's a lot of factors that go into the Palmer drought, but it's one of the most commonly used drought indices as well. We are going to keep our time period the same. It should stay the same if you've already pre-selected that 180-day, and then we can click on Get Map Layer. And now you will notice that according to the PDSI, it doesn't look like the drought is as severe. So this could mean that maybe the relative temperature has been cooler or closer to average, or the wind speeds have been lower. And so if we are taking into account all these other factors that may be influencing drought, we don't see as a severe drought occurring here. Again, the PDSI values you can take a look at here in the color designations as well. Okay, so the last thing that we will examine with the drought example is we are going to now click on Make Graph. Make Graph will, sometimes it'll modify the outlook here, but that's okay. We are going to come over here and select Keep Native Time Series. We are going to select Two Variable Analysis. And now here you can see that you have the option to select different regions, like the Navajo Nation chapters. So those are the 110 chapters, sort of like US counties shown here. And you can actually pick a specific chapter. So we are interested in the Saleh Wheat Fields chapter. So we're going to scroll all the way down here to Saleh. And what you can see then, when you select a specific chapter, we are automatically zoomed into that chapter. This chapter is located very close to Canyon de Chelly, right on the eastern edge. And so then what we're going to do here is we're going to be just getting information from this chapter in particular. Now you'll see along this panel here is that we have the options for two variables. For the first variable, we are going to keep PDSI selected. We are going to keep custom date range, but we're just going to change the date here. So we are interested in looking at a longer time period. For this example, we'll just do 2018, 10/1, 10/1 to 2019, 9/30. So this is the 2019 water year. Now we can click on variable 2, and we are going to take a look at the CHIRPS pentad precipitation. That's automatically selected here. And then we are also going to use a custom date range. So we can click on that here under time period. And then we want to make sure that the date range is the same for both variables. The easiest way I do that is to just come to the first one and copy and paste the start date and the end date. You can just change them to make sure they match. So now take a look at those two variables, make sure the time frame is the same. And essentially what we're going to do is compare the PDSI to precipitation for this chapter. And then click on Get Time Series. Now you can see here this time series where we can see precipitation in green with the CHIRPS data, and then the PDSI in blue. You can come up here and take a look at the legend. And it's an interactive figure. So at any point along here, you can see the values. So what you can initially see here is that the precipitation does have an effect on the PDSI. It's some sort of a lag effect where we see these peaks, we see these wet events, these high rainfall, maybe snowfall events in February and March. And then slowly the PDSI increases. So we do see some influence there. They're somewhat related, but there is a little bit more going on here with the PDSI. If you'd like, you can download these data. You can download the image, or you can download the data as a CSV here. So you'll get all of these data points for this time period. And again, this is just for this particular chapter. Okay, so now we will move on to an example of crop analysis using the NDVI, so using the metric that you all calculated in the first week of this training series. So again, we will just come here and click on Reset and start with a blank map. You'll always get reset to the map interface. Also, if you're having loading issues, I do recommend resetting this every now and then. What we are going to be interested in is examining this region, the Navajo Nation agricultural products region, NAPI, and this is just south of Farmington, New Mexico, and it's a big agricultural region on the nation. What we are going to do here is we are going to look at remote sensing. So if we previously we were looking at climate data, so we can just change the type to remote sensing here. Now you'll see that the default is the Landsat surface reflectance data, and the NDVI is the default index. We are going to be interested in the median. So in the statistic option, you can change that to median. So we're getting the median values over the last northern growing season, the time period again. So we can take a look at the growing season from April to October. Again, with all of these variables, you can get the information about them. NDVI, EVI, NDWI, those types of things. Let's click on Get Map Layer. And now you can see the NDVI value was processed over the entire nation. What we can do then is zoom in to our agricultural region here. You can zoom in around and you'll see that the processing actually is occurring. You can now see the Chusca Mountains very clearly here as well with the high NDVI values. And the other thing you can start to see now are these center pivot irrigation fields, these circles. So the darkest green colors represent the crops with the highest amount of chlorophyll, thus creating a high NDVI value. So these are regions that are pretty heavily irrigated when compared to the natural system. We're going to come in here and zoom in to a very particular field. Now you can look at any field of interest. I'm just going to zoom into one for this example. You should see somewhat similar patterns among most of them. You can also change the opacity here if you want to kind of look at the satellite image and then the NDVI by using that slider. Now we're going to make a graph. So we're going to click on Make Graph. Oh, and it reset us, but that's okay. We can just zoom back in. Sometimes it's good to select Make Graph before you zoom into your region. Okay, so when we're zoomed in very closely to one of these center pivot irrigation fields, now what we want to do is we are interested in creating a polygon around just one of these fields. So for example, if we're only interested in information about a very particular field, we can come in here to region and select polygon. And when you do that, you'll see this pop-up created that describes how you draw a polygon on the map. I'm going to walk you through it, so I'm just going to close that here. But along the top, you will see this draw shape option. So click on that. And when you do that, you'll see crosshair appear. And now you can just click on the outer edge of this entire circle. And it's just kind of like you're digitizing this circle, and I'm coming around and I'm creating a polygon to only include this specific crop. And when I click on the starting point, the circle closes and I get my polygon. If you don't like the look of your polygon, you can always delete this and then redraw it as well. But that works for this example. Now, if we're happy with the polygon, we can change the time period. And what we're going to do is take a look at the entire period of record. So when we do that, we notice that the start date is 1984 and the end date is 2020. And we are going to just get the time series for this entire period for this particular field. Now again, because we're processing so much data on the fly, this might take a while to load. Again, if you have problems with it loading, you can always click on cancel request, try again, or you can select a date range that's shorter. Okay, so now you can see that the map load or the figure loaded. And what we see here on this figure are the NDVI values from 1984 to 2020. And it's a little messy because there's a lot of data here. But again, it's an interactive figure. You can scroll along and see what these values are. It looks like these NDVI values are quite low in the early part of the record. So in this example, maybe the field wasn't irrigated, it looks like, until maybe 1989 or 90, where you start to see these high peaks. The other feature that I notice is that we sort of, for the first, about 7 or 8 years of, or maybe even a little longer, of the field likely being irrigated with these high NDVI values, there's one peak per year, per summer. But it looks like here, as we move into the early 2000s, 2004, 2005, it looks like there's multiple peaks per summer. So this could indicate changes in the crop type, such as alfalfa maybe being grown later on in the time period where there are multiple cuttings per season. So you can start to get a little bit more information there One cool feature about this map, if you click and drag, you can zoom in on a particular time period. So if I'm only interested in what's going on here, then you can see the map has been regenerated and you can really see these multiple cuttings per year. So you can start to get an idea of what the dynamics of the system are. You can always then reset your zoom to the initial zoom of the map. Now what we're going to do is calculate a summary time series. So we can come back over to our layer panel and then select summary time series. And in this example, we are going to look at the mean this time. And we are interested in the northern growing season in our time period. And we are going to look at essentially the summary over the northern growing season for the entire period of record. So we can then click on Get Time Series. Now what this shows you essentially is a bar for each year that summarizes the mean NDVI values over the April to October time period. So now we can really clearly see the changing dynamics of potentially irrigation and agricultural activity in this area. So again, it looks like with these NDVI values indicated in yellow that are below 0.45. So anything that's yellow is sort of below average for the whole period of record, and anything that's green is above. So you could see that likely this field was not irrigated during the early period of this record because those NDVI values are quite low. They are 0.1, 0.14. But then as we get later into the record, they are quite high, 0.7, 0.6. So that's likely indication of irrigation. Now, the final thing we will do is we will take a look at how the NDVI values compare with rainfall. So if, for example, we just see really low rainfall values this whole time period and really high rainfall values this whole time period, maybe it's not irrigation, maybe it's just the vegetation fluctuating based on the climate conditions. So the next thing we'll do is we'll come to two variable analysis. We will still have our NDVI selected, all the same here. Don't make any changes. And then we'll click on variable 2. And we're going to look at the CHIRPS pentad, precipitation. Here we are going to look at, again, the northern growing season. And we are going to make sure our year range is from 1984 to 2019. And we can take a look and make sure that the time periods are the same. So we want them from April to October. Oh, and so this needs to be from April to October. I think it's the end of October. (1984 to 2019). So again, just double checking that those dates are the exact same. And you can reference the exercise document as well. So we'll click on Get Time Series, and we'll wait for the map to load, or for the time series to load. So this is very interesting now. So now what we can see is that the precipitation is this line graph. And again, above average is blue, below average is red for the precipitation. So what we can see is, for example, in 1986, it was a pretty wet year, but the NDVI value is still quite low. However, there are many dry years, 2008, 9, 10, in terms of the precipitation, where we saw high NDVI values. So this is really indicative of irrigation, where we see low rainfall, but we still have very high vegetation health in this region. So you can tell that especially during these years, there was irrigation applied to the field. So you could do this for any region of interest. You can draw circles. It could be a restoration project, a high elevation meadow. You could look at different indices like the NDWI, the Normalized Difference Water Index. So there's a lot of things you can do. You can play around with the different regions, making polygons, looking at specific chapters of interest. So this concludes the DSET example for this exercise. And now we will move on to the firms and worldview exercise. Okay, so now we are moving on to exercise 10, where we will be working through some examples using the Fire Information for Resource Management System, or FIRMS, as well as Worldview, which are two great places for examining wildfires. And we will be looking at wildfire data from two NASA sensors, MODIS and VIIRS, and Cindy mentioned this in the lecture for today. And the Worldview example, there are many, many different applications of the Worldview tool as well. So what you see here now is just the firm's data, the firm's website. And as Cindy mentioned, if you just scroll down here, you can get some information about the different features of this tool. So we're going to take a look at the fire map. You can also download active fire data. You can get set up with fire email alerts for particular regions if you have a region of interest. You can look at archive data, so historical data of fires. And there are also a few other web services like creating maps for you. We are going to start off by clicking on the fire map. Now you can see using the fire map here, there are some features along the left-hand panel. You can look at those other features that we just discussed. There are also tutorials here as well. We won't be getting in too much depth with firms. So if there are other things you're interested in. There's also the data display. Here along the right is where we will modify a lot of the data that we're interested in viewing. And this also is recently changed. They've made some updates. So this might look a little different than in some of the examples in the exercise, but you should still be able to do the same thing. Here along the right, you can make decisions about the types of data you want to display. So you can see there are fires in near real time from VIIRS and MODIS, and you can view data from today, the last 24 hours. We will modify some of these features as we take a look at the data. You can also take a look at burned area, as well as some more advanced features along this panel. The first thing we'll do here is we will change the overlays. So the overlays layer or option here along the right-hand side and select countries. Now you can see there is information about each of the countries and boundaries for these regions. Now, again, depending on the date in which you do this exercise or access this tool, your fire locations might look very different because this is in near real time. So in the example I will show today might be very different than the example that you actually pick out. What we will first do is zoom into North America. So you can pan and zoom. And one feature that always gets me about these global maps is that it sort of looks like the whole world is on fire until you start to zoom in to get a closer look. So we've had some fires burning recently in California. We have a major complex here burning up in the Mendocino forest. We have another complex burning in the Sierra down here near Fresno. So for your example, just zoom into North America where you see a cluster of red dots. So I will zoom into what I believe to be the Creek Fire Complex. In the exercise, there was an example of fires in Minnesota. So again, just wherever you see a large complex of fires, you can complete these steps and go through these. So if you zoom in closely enough to where you see some of these pixels, you'll start to notice that there are some red pixels and there are some orange pixels. The red pixels are the VIIRS data, which are available at a 375 meter spatial resolution, and the MODIS data, which is a coarser resolution. You can check here for the actual resolution of the data, but this is 1 kilometer. And you can close this here. So you can see as you start to zoom in the difference in the spatial resolution of these fire detects. So what this indicates are actively burning fires. And within each pixel, you can get more information about those pixels. So if we come down here along the bottom and click on Identify, we can then click anywhere on the map and get more information about this particular pixel. We can zoom in even farther to make sure that we are only selecting one. But if you click on this, wherever your example is of a large fire complex, you can see there are data from MODIS, Terra, MODIS Aqua, VIIRS, from Suomi NPP, as well as from NOAA. So what we can see here are things like the location, the latitude, longitude, the brightness, which is a measure of essentially the how severe the fire is burning. So the radiative power of the fire at that location. So the higher these values, the more intense the fire is burning at that point. And then you can get more information like the acquisition time, etc. You can also kind of toggle back and forth to notice the differences between these, say, brightness values. Generally, because VIIRS is more has a higher spatial resolution, we tend to rely on VIIRS a little more closely. You can also notice that for some of these pixels, if I select another example, you should start to see for some of these pixels there is confidence. So this is 100% confident that there was a fire there. Some of them don't have confidence levels, but you can kind of click through and check to see. The confidence essentially is an indication of how sure the data is that there's actually a fire there. So there could be, if the brightness value is quite low, for example, what the sensor could be picking up might not be a wildfire. It may be some other phenomenon, and then the confidence may be quite low. In this example that you can see here, the confidence is 100%. So they're fairly certain that there's a fire actually burning in this location. Sometimes if there are prescribed burns or agricultural burns, there may be lower confidence and the brightness or the fire radiative power, the FRP values, might be lower in those instances because the fire is not as extensive or severe. So you might notice differences in your map if you're seeing much lower values. You can also change the date range of when you are examining fires. So you can close this and take a look at the Advanced tab. And you can actually select a very specific date range. So you have the option of multiple different days. You can look a week past. You can select your start date and then move backwards according to what you're interested in. And then again, as I mentioned, in the exercise itself, the start and end date might be a little different. But what you can do is you can essentially look over time. For example, you can scroll down here and look at 4 weeks or a month. And then what you should see in a lot of locations, not in all, but in many locations, if we look at the thermal anomalies for the entire month, we can see many more of these red pixels pop up. So you can see that within this whole month, if we're looking at the thermal anomalies, the fire is quite large here. So you notice that if you change the time period, you see more pixels pop up generally. We look at 3 weeks versus 4 in this example, if you have these large fire complexes. Another feature that you can look at is the count. So you can actually see the number of times a fire was detected in a particular grid for that time period. And you can do this here by looking at the gridded fire hotspots panel. And then you can click turn this on and you can see the counts of fire detections from VIIRS, MODIS, Aqua, or MODIS Terra. Now, what you'll notice is within this large grid here, we had over 3,000 fire detects over the period of 4 weeks in this example. So you can also zoom out and see what these grids look like. Similarly, the reds indicate a larger number of fire detections, and the yellows and oranges indicate a lower number. So you can see some of these large complexes that have been occurring in the last month or so in California in terms of the burns. You can also take a look at how the fire products from MODIS and Aqua compare. You'll notice that when you turn on the MODIS compared to VIIRS, there are quite fewer fire detects. That is due to the spatial resolution comparison between MODIS and VIIRS. One other really cool feature is that along with the fire detects, you can also take a look at the corrected reflectance. So you can take a look at the satellite imagery as well. So if we come back here to quick view, we're again just taken back to our 24 hours. We can take a look at the VIIRS corrected reflectance image, for example, which now you can really see the fire detections along with the smoke coming off of these fire locations. So that's a really clear visualization of the smoke plume and where it's traveling in California here from these fires. You can also shift through time and take a look at different time periods and see how the smoke is moving. with the fire over time. And we'll take a look at that with worldview as well. Another feature here that we have, so those are some of the features on the firm's fire map that you can play around with. Another feature is that we have this active fire data. And the active fire data is a great place to just go ahead and download the fire detections from the last 24 hours, 48 hours, or 7 days. And you can see here that we have some different options. So within the active fire data, you can download MODIS or VIIRS data, and then you can download it for these very large regions across the world. So again, this is global information and is in near real time. So you can see, you can download shapefiles to be used in, say, QGIS. You can download KML for Google Earth, or just the text file of the location of the fire. And if you click here, the files will automatically download into your browser, so you don't have to wait for approval for those fires. Next, we will go ahead and take a look at historical fires. So we're going to actually go back to our fire map. So now back in our fire map, we will again take a look at the overlays and select our countries and regions. For this example, we're going to zoom into the California-Oregon border. So again, we can just pan and zoom. You can use the scroll on your mouse too. So we're going to zoom into this region along the Northern California and Oregon border. And what we are interested in this example is looking at the burned area products. So we will go ahead and select Advanced. And we want to go ahead and change this date range along the top. With all of the burned area products, they are available from MODIS, and they are available within a 3-month lag. So you have to be aware of that because it does take time to process them and create these maps. So we are actually interested in this example in a 2014 fire. So we can just move this date range to really any time in 2014. And then we can come down here and take a look at the MODIS burned area and change this to 2014. And what we can do is essentially take a look at the burned area for each month of this year. We're just going to go ahead and select all. And once we've selected all, the layer will load here, and we can start to see that there was quite a large fire here near the Klamath National Forest. So we can zoom in a little more closely to this region to look at this fire. Also, you might see the fire detects for October of 2014 pop up if you have these turned on for VIIRS and MODIS. So we can just turn those off. And now we can see that these colors are aligned with the month that the fire burned. So in this example, in this for this fire, this was actually the Happy Camp complex, which in 2014 was the largest wildfire in California. And it burned near the lands of several tribes in this region, and burned very close and even across the border on into Oregon. And we can see that the fire burned mostly in August and September. And again, we can turn these on and off and see when it burned at certain time periods. So it looked like it started off in August and burned through September in quite a large area. You could also download archive data for this particular fire if you are interested in obtaining a shapefile of the area that was burned for this fire for this region. So if you have a particular fire in mind that affected lands of interest, you could come in and select this specific year, make some of these modifications, and then you can come down over here to the archive download. And under the archive download, you can request to obtain the active data for the same time period within August and September of 2014. So you can come in here and create a new request. And in the drop-down region, you can select custom region, and then you can use the map. And you do have to come back in and zoom over to the region that you are interested in. And then you can draw just maybe a very large polygon around this area. So then you can click on Draw Polygon. And when this pops up, you can essentially click on the map to create your polygon. And you can just make it really big to make sure that you include the region. And then when you click on the first spot, it'll close the polygon. If you're happy with it, you can click on Save. And then it saves those coordinates of the polygon here within your download request. So then here you can select your fire source. You can select all of them if you're interested in both MODIS and VIIRS data. And in the From box, you could select, for example, 2014, August 1st. And then in the To box, you could select 2014, maybe October 1st. You could extend those out if you'd like. And then you can select a shapefile. You can download the data as a CSV or a JSON file. And then all you need to do is submit your email address, and you will get a confirmation email. And then when you submit a request, you'll see a web page where you can view all of your data requests, and you will receive an email when the data has been processed. So you can go ahead and obtain those shapefiles from that data request. So the last example that we will do for firms is we will go back to our fire map. Again, we will zoom in to an area in California. We had a lot of fires here, so it's a great place to study them. Not the best place to be in sometimes while these fires are burning. And we are going to again go to Advanced. And we are going to be interested in a fire from 2017. You can really choose any month here, so long as it's the correct year. And then we will come down here and change our date range to 2017 and then select all. And once this processes, you will start to see a very large fire appear. Many large fires appear just north of San Francisco, near the town of Santa Rosa. So here again, a great example, you can see the month in which the fire burned. The majority of those active fire detections were detected in October in this example. And this complex is the massive wildfire associated with the Tubbs Fire, the Nuns Fire, and the Atlas Fire. And the Tubbs Fire was the most destructive in California's history in terms of cost. and it burned portions of Napa, Sonoma, and Lake counties. It also burned near Clear Lake, where members of the Elm Indian colony of Pomo Indians had to flee their rancheria. Many people had to flee their homes during this event. So finally, if you're interested in a particular region and you want to receive these types of fire alerts of when active fires are burning, you can finally come here to the Fire Alerts tab and enter your email address and click on Proceed. And if you click on Create Fire Alert, you can, in a very similar manner, create a custom polygon. So you can name it, you can create a custom region, or if you're interested in a specific country or protected region. And you can choose which type of data you want to be alerted about and the alert frequency, those types of things. So you can get something daily, weekly, or when an event is occurring near real time. So that concludes the section on the firm's fire mapper. And now we will just have a couple short examples on using worldview for fires as well. Here is the main page for the worldview tool. It is one of my absolute favorite tools for visualizing and accessing all kinds of data. We're going to be showing fires example as we did with firms, but there are a lot of different features for worldview. One other thing I love about worldview is when you first arrive at the page, if you're someone who is really unfamiliar with using remote sensing data, you can come in here to take a look at these different examples. And if you click on any of these examples, like bushfires in Australia, what will happen automatically is that the data will load that is relevant to that application. So you'll see things like the active fires, you'll see the true reflectance image where you can see the smoke plumes. In some of these, you can also see aerosols information. So this is a really great feature if you're just very new to these applications and say you want to look at rainfall data in association with Hurricane Maria, for example. You can do that. You can also just close it and add your own layers in as well. Another great way that worldview makes the worldview is really user-friendly is you can go ahead and add layers. And similar to those like case study examples they showed when you first initially go to the web page, they've organized the data based on the application area or the focus area. So you could see here that there is a particular application of fires. And within fires, they have many types of data, such as aerosol index, fires and thermal anomalies, corrected reflectance, which is useful. So it's a really great way, I think, to organize and visualize and think about these themes. So we're going to click on fires, and then we are going to click on fires and thermal anomalies. And when we do that, we'll see some similar familiar data sets here. We are going to go ahead and click on Suomi NPP VIIRS. And we're going to click on day and night. You can click on both of them, or you can just click on this day and night option. Either way. Now we will go ahead and close this search option. And then along the bottom, we can change the date. So now that we've selected those options, we can see that all of the active fires are showing up in our map. And we can also this time slider very conveniently to change the date that we're viewing these fires. You can also use these arrows to click forward or backwards in time, or you can change the time here. There's a lot of different ways that we can change these layers. You can also come in here and automatically the default is corrected reflectance from MODIS. You can change this to something like the blue marble if you're not interested in seeing these clouds, but we'll keep that layer selected for now. So now we are going to, again, zoom into the same region where we just discussed the Tubbs fire just north of San Francisco. You can see some fires burning right now, actually, up in Mendocino, the Mendocino complex up here. Again, the date that you do this will look different because this is near real-time data. You can zoom along here and see how these fires have progressed and where the air quality may or may not be bad. So here we're going to go ahead and change our date to October 9th of 2017. And when we do that, we will automatically see the data from that day. So you can see this very dramatic active fire detections with red and the large smoke plumes from the MODIS surface reflectance image in the same map view. You can also move the slider a day in advance to see how the fire is progressing and how the smoke is moving, given different wind patterns. So you could see from the day that we started, there is a pretty strong offshore wind. So a lot of the smoke is going offshore. And then a day later, it looks like a lot of the smoke is being blown onshore. We see a marine layer coming in here with clouds and then smoke coming northeast off of these fires. Another really cool feature about Worldview that I really love is this camera option, where you can create your own animation. So if you click on the pop-up here, you will be able to select a few different days and create a little GIF of the fire progression. So what we can do here is make sure that the start date is October 10th, and then we're going to change the end date and make sure that that is October 20th. And we are viewing this at 3 frames per second now. Let's just move that to 2, so it moves a little slower. This will change how quickly the images progress or not. So we move that to 2 frames per second, and then we can click on this Create Animated GIF option. Now we can move our bounding box. So we can slide this bounding box over. We can make it bigger or smaller, depending on the region we want to evaluate. And then we can click on Create GIF. And it'll just create this GIF pretty quickly, depending on how many days you have in there. And what you're seeing now is the progression of the fire detections and the smoke among these 10 days where the fire was occurring. Some days are better than others in terms of the ability to see the fires with the clouds versus the smoke. But then you can come in here and just download this GIF and save it on your computer, put it in a presentation, however you'd like to use it. I think it's a really cool feature here. And then it does have the timestamp along the bottom as well. Okay, so let's close the GIF animation. We're going to come back here and add and take a look at some different data. We are going to go to Add Layers. We're going to come back to our categories and we're going to come over to air quality, and we are interested in the aerosol index. So we are going to select data from Aura OMI. And again, with each of these data sets, you'll see a lot of information about the data set itself. So this is essentially an index of particles in the air, aerosols, that are oftentimes associated with these wildfire events. So we can click on the aerosol index layer, and we can close this here, and we can now see that during the same time period, we can see the aerosol index values. So you could see, due to this smoke, the aerosol index values are quite high. You can always come back to the description by clicking on the eye. You can also change the some of the layer options. So you can change the opacity so you can see sort of underneath this layer. You can change the color palette, the thresholds. There's a lot of different things you can change. But if you change the opacity to, for example, 25%, then you can close this layer. And so now what you can see is this combination of data. So you have the fire detection, so these little dots. You can still sort of see the MODIS corrected reflectance imagery with the smoke below it, and then you see the associated aerosol index values. So it's a great way to combine different types of data and visualize these data to get a holistic picture of what's occurring on the ground, in particular with wildfires. There are a lot of other data on Worldview associated with things like rainfall. It's really great for monitoring tropical storms with the ability to look at things like GOES data, SMAP data with soil moisture. There's a lot of different data sets on here. So I really would encourage you all to explore Worldview. It's a great, really user-friendly tool, and I think a great starting point for a lot of folks who want to use remote sensing data but don't really know maybe what's out there or what the data is displaying. So you can come in and visualize things pretty easily before deciding to download data or to see if remote sensing data is really going to be able to help you answer your questions. So that concludes the exercise on examining fires through firms and Worldview. I hope that provided a nice overview of some options of visualization and download for these types of wildfire events. So now we will take any questions that you have. Thank you. All right, everyone, give me a moment while I share my screen for our questions. We had a few come in already, and we will discuss a few of those. Okay, so you should now be able to see my screen with some of the questions that came in. If you have other questions, feel free to continue to type those in and we'll try to answer those as they come. So the first question here is, how can we display the county vector layer, just like showing in the demonstration? So I think this is a question about DSET. And within DSET, so DSET was really created to serve the Navajo Nation and their needs. However, it's a spin-off of Climate Engine, and Climate Engine is global. All of the data are global for Climate Engine, and if you are interested in, for example, identifying US states or counties, various administrative boundaries, or even hydrologic units for the US, you can see in my screenshot there, I've shown what that looks like on Climate Engine under the Layers tab along the top. So you do have some additional options there. There are some world layers as well. I'm not as familiar with what those do, but imagine you can put the countries as a vector layer as well. Do note that with Climate Engine, however, there isn't the option to run area average calculations like we can do with DSET. You can load the vector files to get the outlines of states and counties and things like that, but there are some functionality differences between DSET and Climate Engine. And if you're having some issues with the data loading, it can take quite a bit of bandwidth to run some of these processes. One thing I would recommend is try zooming in really far to the region of interest prior to generating map layers, for example, because what Climate Engine DSET will do is run the analysis over whatever area you can see on your screen. So if you're trying to do this for the entire US, for example, it's going to take a while and you might run into bandwidth issues. So a heads up there on that. I think this is also related, the second question was also related to DSET. And it says, I noticed this tool won't show data in Alaska. So again, go to Climate Engine, those data are available globally, so long as it's a data set that's available globally. So there might be some data sets that are specific to the US, but all of the remote sensing data like Landsat and MODIS and all those things are available globally. So do use Climate Engine for any of those applications. The next question, can one upload a shapefile for firms data? I'm not sure offhand. I know that you can download the KML or shapefile data from firms for the near real time. So that's looking at the last, oh, actually, I think that the download is for the last like 48 hours, for example, and 72 hours. What you can do is download those and then open them in a QGIS or Google and clip to your region of interest. For the alerts, you might be able to upload a shapefile. I know that you can identify a rectangular region of interest in order to obtain fire alerts. But I'm not sure, I don't think you can actually upload a shapefile into firms and just download the thermal anomalies from within your shapefile. You'll have to do that post firms. But that's something we can double check on as well. Okay, the next question on Climate Engine, I noticed that you have more points along the bottom than I have for my example. The NDVI graph is every 10 years where mine is every 5. So what this might, a couple things might have happened here. Double check your date range to make sure that you've included the proper time frame. The other thing that could happen is the figures, after you load a time series figure and you display a time series figure on your web browser, it's dynamic. So you can zoom in to particular years by clicking and dragging, and then you can, the figure will automatically reset to those years that you've selected in your drag region. So if you're zoomed into a few years, but you've actually ran the process for a longer time period, you can always go to the top right of the figure and click on something like reset zoom or reset window for time series. I think it's reset zoom for the time series. So that'll show all of the data that you've processed for whatever time period you selected. So that could be maybe what you're seeing there with the 5 versus 10 year in your NDVI graph. And let's see if we had any other questions come in. Oh, it sounds like with this, my comment on the NDVI graph there, I'm not really understanding the question. If you could elaborate on that, feel free, and I'll try to identify what's going on there. You can also email me if you want to take a screenshot of what your graph looks like and email me. You can do that. Doesn't look like we have any other questions at the moment that came in. We'll maybe pause for one more minute to see if anything else comes in. While we wait, I did want to mention our survey again. So we've provided the link into the chat window, and what I can do is provide it again as well. We would really, really appreciate getting your feedback on how you like the course, things that you would like to see us improve upon. The feedback is so valuable to us because it really does inform how we change things for the future. And then also, if you're interested in any kind of follow-up training, we'd love to hear from you about that as well. And we'll, of course, be showing this link to the survey during our final session on Thursday as well. So if you don't have time to complete it now, I think the Thursday session will be quite a bit shorter, so you'll have some time during our 2-hour window together to complete that. Today's session was a little longer than I had remembered it. Okay. And then my email address here is amberjean.mccullum@nasa.gov. If you have any specific questions. Okay, great. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions for today. I want to thank you all again for being with us. We're really happy and excited that we are able to provide this training to you all. And we will be joined again on Thursday for our final session. We'll be talking about time series analysis using a really great tool called Appears. Oh, excuse me, that was last week. Where's my brain? We will be looking at Global Forest Watch, which is an exciting tool as well to look at changes in forest. And that's another global tool, but we'll be focusing on some tribal regions in the Pacific Northwest for that. Great, well, everyone have a great rest of your day, and we will talk with you all on Thursday. Thank you.